Mabuhay, everyone. Live and go beyond existing. This is Reverend Reg, and today is July 24, 2021, and it's 18 minutes past the hour of 11 here in Manila. It's morning actually, but it's a rainy Saturday afternoon, and today I'm very excited to introduce to everyone a new friend of mine whom I met through Dr. Joy Maestas. And just to give you a brief background, our guest today is Reverend Liz Jackson. She is the Reverend and founder of the Lion Stairs Ministry, and it's actually short for Living in Oppressed Nations Truth, Attitudes, Reality, and Education Society. She is an ordained minister of Universal Life Church Ministries. Her pen name is Angel of Ephesus, scribe of the Lion Stairs Ministry, Attitudes of God. She is also an anchor, producer, and director of River City Revival podcast of the Lion Stairs Ministry. She's also an app and web designer, and she also has a degree in psychology, specializing in behavioral and mental health for child and adolescent. She's also a counselor specializing in rational emotive behavior therapy, and she's also a passionate truth seeker. During the pandemic, Liz was able to expand the ministry, taking it to the streets as an essential worker, making deliveries by writing messages of hope, inspiration, and unity on her vehicle windows. She spreads hope and positivity during lockdown, and she would also leave thank you cards with her deliveries, letting people know that they are not alone and that we must remain hopeful. She also started River City Revival, the official podcast of the Lion Stairs Ministry, and continues to do street ministry every day. She is also very passionate for her ministry to come at the time when her life needed God's power and presence the most. And this is also the reason why she's expanding it to a bigger audience. This passion stems from her many trials and tribulations she has faced in her own life as a child, single mother, and adult. Aiming to spread hope, healing, and faith to a broken world, she uses her psychology degree to put God back in all aspects of life, teaching others how to free their minds as God has taught her. She also believes that when our hearts and minds are negative actions, our hearts and minds are negative, our actions will also be negative, and that we all have a choice as human beings to either learn from our past and heal, or continue to oppress ourselves and others by being hateful, greedy, evil, and jealous. Reverend Liz formulates each sermon using Albert Ellis' rational emotive therapy outline, which is one of the ministry's important foundations. REBT is aimed at changing our perspective of life events by changing the way we believe and perceive the world, events, and life in general. So, without further ado, let me welcome Reverend Liz, and let's give her a big round of applause.
Thank you. I am so grateful to God and Reverend Reg for this opportunity. I I am speechless beyond words because I've prayed for everything and I've had visions, and to see it come into fruition is just, God is amazing.
Yeah,
Amazing.
indeed. Amazing, Reverend Liz. And, I'm very excited to have you here because imagine all the passionate work that you have done going to the streets and uplifting people. And we both know, as people who do energy work, that it can take a toll in our own energy. It's not easy supporting people mentally and emotionally and talking to them when they're feeling down. It can take a toll on your energy. So,
Most
anyway,
definitely, Rev. Most definite.
yeah. And Reverend Liz, I want to ask you, how did you manage the stress during the lockdown? Because I'm very sure that you also had to manage your own energy and rejuvenate yourself. How did you do it?
What I did did was I found joy in being able to deliver food or products to people, and be able to talk about God. People would stop me at stoplights and read the phrase, when our hearts and minds are negative, our actions and behavior will be negative. And they would stop and tell me, this is the most powerful speaking truth. On the other side of my car, it says, liberation begins when oppression of self, oppression of others, greed, hate, and envy end, because we can all choose love, joy, peace, and God. For those of you who don't know me, I live in St. Louis in Missouri in the United States. And I just read before doing this interview, it's ranked the fourth dangerous city in the United States right now. So I firmly believe that God has put this book out here to target the hearts and minds of those who are wanting to seek Him and His righteousness.
Thank you so much for that, Reverend Liz. It's very amazing that you're able to do that kind of compassionate work, and especially it was done voluntarily. So thank you for being someone who's not just a person of faith, but a person of faith in action. And we both know,
Yes,
Reverend Liz, that as part of human psychology, anything that you would like to change, but we are not able to put ourselves in the proper frame of mind, it will
mm-hmm.
be difficult to make that kind of change. Especially, honestly, I want to give you another round of applause because reading from your bio, you have been through so much personally, and being able to convert the most painful and the darkest parts of our past into something that's going to become that space of hope, upliftment, and inspiration for a lot of people takes a lot of internal healing. So
It does.
please feel free to share with us one of those things that was painful, but you were able to convert it into a position of strength, power, and a place where you can be generous in ways that you can be compassionate towards others, just like you did during the pandemic.
Absolutely. So, my when they were 7 and 8 were molested and sodomized. Reg and I were discussing about, I asked God, when will all of this chaos and destruction within my life end? When will my daughter be healed? Because she developed anorexia from her trauma. And I talk about that, in these sermons. Um, I asked him, and that's what this is about, is asking God the why and what happened, because he says when we seek him, we will find. If we ask, it'll be given, and if we knock, the door will be open. And so many of us have been so closed-minded to even think about God that we've turned to the world, and the world hasn't done anything but bring us down and destroy us. I don't know if anybody follows the news in the United States, but they're talking about, slavery again in the 1900s. That's not okay, because it's 2021 and we shouldn't be judging people on the skin tone or the appearance of anything. It's the content and character of your heart and mind. So when I asked God to show me this, he told me to read the book of Revelation and dissect it into Greek, and when needed, back into Hebrew, back in missions, so I could thoroughly understand what he was asking me to do. Because I asked him, I said, why did this happen? And so now I know my entire life from beginning, because I learned through all this that my mom and I love her to death, and I'm not speaking against anything, so please don't take this wrong, but had, several abortions. So I question, why am I even alive, at several points in my life? And God would always there. I never denied God no matter what happened. I did get mad at him, and like every child gets mad at their father, I would be like, I don't understand you, don't talk to me. And he'd still talk. I had visions. I moved when he told me to move, and publish for the first time on this book whatever little bit of my past that was still being held onto finally was released, and I have felt nothing but joy in his spirit within me since doing what he asked of me. And that is again what the book talks about too, is about seeking God, his righteousness, and learning how to do what he wants of us.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Reverend Liz. It's such a
Prosper and
beautiful
work
thing.
together.
Amazing. All right. So anyway, thank you everyone for tuning in. I think Reverend Liz, we have no choice but to switch to the audio right now. The internet in the Philippines because of the typhoon is going crazy right now.
I
So
understand.
we'll
I
have to
understand, and I'm
shift. But
praying for you guys for safety. And I know I try to follow the world news, so I know you guys are prone to, typhoons and everything. So I pray God's got you guys safe and sound. I know that. I know that.
awesome. Thank you for that, Reverend Liz. And
Yeah.
we'll be back for a few minutes. We'll just have to convert the audio. And of course, we're going to have Reverend Liz again for another episode. But for now, we're just converting this to audio.
Absolutely.
Awesome. And now we're back. I'm here again. This is your host, Reverend Reg, and my guest today is Reverend Liz Jackson. It's a sunny, I mean, it's a stormy weather here in Manila, Philippines, and it's 11:33 a.m. And I'm talking to an acquaintance whom I met through Reverend Joy Mestas, and her name is Reverend Liz Jackson. So we're talking about what she did for the community, especially during the lockdown when a lot of people were going through a lot of pressure. So good morning again, Reverend Liz, from my side of the globe.
Good morning, Reggie. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you again.
Yes, thank you so much. And it's amazing because we're able to connect and we're able to connect despite this stormy weather here in the Philippines. So we switched to audio.
Exactly.
You know, I'm so excited because you're one of the most inspiring people that I have ever met, especially going through that incident that you just mentioned. It's not easy to shift, but the amazing thing about you, you used your spiritual connection to source as a way to overcome that traumatic experience. So you were talking about anorexia and moving on from that experience. So please tell us more about it.
Okay, so I was trying to think where I left off. Anyway, the book is again pretty much designed to answer why. It's all my research into why people are negative and evil. The Lord God brought me to the books of the Apocrypha, so called Apocrypha, the scrolls and Qumran, Enoch, Jubilees, Yasher. All those books that are not included in our standard Bibles have so much information. So when God told me to dissect Revelation, he reminded me of Ephesians 6:12, where it states, "We wrestle not with flesh and blood, but with principalities and rulers and wickedness in high places." So I had to ask him, what did that actually mean? And so he showed me that. So it made sense to me as he was telling me that, yes, these are evil spirits. And so when I first started my psychology classes, psychology originally believed in demons and the paranormal as to why people were behaving irregular and hateful and evil. But you read the books like Enoch, Yasher, and Jubilees, God tells us why. He tells us about the fallen angels. He tells us why the spirits of the evil giants are still here. He tells us about our adversary. It's just, the world has told us God only exists in a religion, and that's not true. God exists in everything. And changing your perspective on what the world has told you, what the world has done to you, and what the world has oppressed you really, really matters whenever you're trying to walk with God. Because when you can perceive the world from His eyes, then you can perceive God. And it first comes with understanding His word and trying to change our hearts and minds first.
Thank you so much, Reverend Liz. I love that you talked about changing our hearts and our minds first because it's such a powerful, transformative, and it's something that's sustainable when the change that's happening is from the mind and the heart. So please tell us more about it. What exactly did you do to change the state of that mind and heart? Because it's easy to go to that space where we can be resentful. And a lot of times, people are not only resentful towards who did something wrong to them, but a lot of people can be resentful towards God, especially when we think that we are connected to God and then bad things happen to us. And I know a lot of people who will not think twice about getting mad at God. So, how did you make that inner transformation? Especially, you talked about changing the mind and the heart. That's not easy to do.
No, Rev Reg, it is not easy to do. It was a process. It was a very long process because my process first began with God sending me into the wilderness, and my wilderness was St. Louis. He disconnected me from my daughters in order to see what happens to men and women who do not get the help that they need, whether it be drug addiction or mental abuse, violence, or being, sexually assaulted. I worked with a lot of mental um, handicapped individuals. And I mean that literally because they could no longer function. They had no cognitive abilities. So when God put that perspective into my life, I then knew I needed to help my daughters in a way that I didn't know how to do. So he told me to go to school. So then, as I'm learning my psychology, he's working within me on the Bible verses that talk about our hearts and minds. And he told me, psychology proves me, Liz, so prove to the world that you can overcome this. So he had to overcome the root of bitterness within me because, like you said, I had some animosity to God. I'm not going to lie. Anybody who's ever been molested and sodomized, the last person you're going to want to talk to is God at times. So I had that bitterness. I was angry at my girls' father for letting things happen. I had hostility within me. And he showed me what those words meant. And then when I got to the portion on our brain function and cognitive, abilities and what portions of the brain controlled what emotions or our thoughts or our reactions, God then showed me how to align what psychology was trying to teach us to his word to show that when we are under chronic stress, when we are under chronic doubt, when we are in constant fear, our baseline of anxiety rises. And that's what I learned working behavioral health at the hospital as well. So then God showed me, okay, these are the verses that I'm telling you to reside in me, that I am your strength, and you need to teach it in this way. So he said, lay your book or my book out like this. We're going to talk about what stress does to the brain, why you need me, and how I help you. And so that is the formulation for each sermon. Because when we believe and change our belief about whatever this world has done to us, and then we start to understand what God is really trying to teach us, we can then apply His word to our life. Grace really means in Greek God's divine influence upon the heart and its reflection back into the world. So if the world can't see God in you, then we still have some work to do. But that is what he told me. And so, being saved by grace, the only thing I could do is buck myself down and say, oh, okay, God, I surrender. Because, like Jonah, I tried running a couple different times from my calling, and he's like, no, that ain't happening. And so, giving in is the best option. I came to a point where I said I had enough. And learning and working with people who have had traumatic experiences or who have been abused or are in abusive relationship have to determine when enough is enough. And I got tired of the world telling me God didn't exist when I saw him, when I knew I was broke and he made a way for us, or whenever, I needed something for my daughter, but I couldn't get it, and all of a sudden it manifested. Or he would visit me in a dream, or for instance, that dream I just mentioned, he showed me my house when he told me to build the ministry in St. Louis. In a dream, not once but twice, but like 4 or 5 times. And I kept saying, are you sure? And so then lined up. And I signed the lease without even seeing the house, knowing that that's what he had for me. So I went from suicidal ideations to really sitting down and talking to God like I'm talking to you, Reverend Reggie, like we're having a conversation, because that is what God's relationship with you should be, with the world should be, like we're having a conversation, because he says we perish for lack of knowledge, but he is the best source for any question that we have. And he will answer any questions, because he says if you seek him with your whole heart, he will be found.
All
Okay,
right.
I can turn that off.
Thank you for
I do
that, Reverend Liz.
apologize.
Yeah. There's the spirit also backing you up. So anyway, that's a cute interruption. So anyway, Reverend Liz, you're such an amazing person. I have a couple of questions for you. And
Yes.
one of the things that I wanted to ask you, would you still remember? I'm sorry I have to bring this up because I was a preschool teacher and a grade school teacher as well. So when
Mhm.
people tell me that something very traumatic happened to them when they're very young, do you still remember what state of mind did you have at that time? Was it like, were you naive at that time that you were just so trusting of whoever it was that was accompanying you? Please
Um,
enlighten me.
what happened was when we had joint custody, I got married at 18 and divorced at 21. And we went to court and, obtained joint custody. So it'd be like Monday to Monday, where my daughters would be gone for 7 days. And I didn't get to see them because that was their father's time. So he had a girlfriend, and her father was the one who molested and sodomized my children. At the point when I found out, it was like a tsunami because it was raining, it was thunderstorming. I had put my daughters in the tub because they just got home from their dads. My middle daughter told me the man she considered a grandpa, was putting her down and should never have been picking her up. So I asked, questions. We as parents need to ask our children questions. And again, ask God questions because He'll show you. But I wasn't expecting what she told me, and I died. I literally, I know I died. Parts of me, all of me died because not only one of my daughters, and I have three, but it was my older two. And all I could think of was suicide or homicide for a very long time. I thought of a million and one ways to hurt the people who hurt my daughters. I thought of a million and one ways of why I should still exist in this world, because the worst thing as a mother, other than losing your child to death, was for me, and I know at least those who have had sexual abuse, trauma, and maybe have even read about it, how it does, split the brain in two and can form two separate personalities when a person is sodomized. It's just life altering. Nobody in your life is ever going to be the same. So I had to deal with those thoughts as well. And I know now that's why God moved me into the wilderness. Because in my wilderness phase in 2011 and 12, I was gone for 8 months. But I learned God. I worked my mental health job. I learned what He wanted. I grew with Him. I wrote poetry to Him. Um, and He prepared me to go back and battle for my daughters. So I was able to put them in psychology programs and get them, cognitive behavior therapy. I was able to do what I needed to do for them. And never at once did I stop and say, okay, I have to focus on me. What am I going to do for myself? I threw myself in with my daughters. And yes, that was wrong, but at that time I didn't know that. And then God, who always works in His perfect timing, timing in 2016 provided me faith-based services with a faith-based counselor, again from St. Louis, for free, who was able to put into perspective what God wanted for my life. And that's what really started my transformation, was whenever someone finally saw that I needed help, because I was alone for 10 years doing this myself. Sometimes my mom would help me, sometimes I'd get help from others, but it was really me and God. There was a time that my daughter needed to be hospitalized in an eating disorder facility. And I had to go to court to get a court order for her to go across state lines. Otherwise, her dad would have had me arrested. And my daughter dropped to 73 pounds, so she had to go. And I didn't have any money, but when I got down there, God provided, the deposit and everything the day she needed to be admitted. There are so many things that I've encountered in my walk with God that I can't wait to share with the world, because his hand is on all of us. We just have to know his signs and his language and what he's trying to do, because he always makes a way. It's just we lack faith because we, again, have been taught that he is just a religion. He is just in a box, and that is certainly not true.
Thank you for sharing that, Reverend Liz. I'm just, very proud of you, especially, being
Thank you.
able to be in the, you're welcome, being able to stay in the space where you have your presence of mind. All right. Anyway, so Satnam, everyone. It's July 24, 2021. Time check. It's 11:49 a.m. here in Manila, Philippines. I'm talking to Reverend Liz Jackson, and you're listening to the show Perspective, where we encourage everyone to put things in perspective because your perspective shapes your reality. And this morning, I'm talking to Reverend Liz Jackson, and we're talking about her personal journey as a mom and what she had to put up with, especially some of the traumatic experiences that she had to deal with, given that her children experienced something very unfavorable, and how she moved past that phase in her life using her faith in God, her relationship with God as the foundation to building her life anew. And especially, Reverend Liz, another thing that I wanted to draw from you, you talked about anorexia, and that's another big thing because, like what you said, when a person goes through something very traumatic, you're not functioning at your optimal level, and somehow your personality, uh you have like a personality split. Did I hear you right?
Yes. Learning during my psychology courses, I took abnormal psychology. So
Mm-hmm.
I am one, when I read something, if I don't have enough information, I'm going to Google it until I feel like I'm full and my answer has been resolved. And so that's what I do with whatever God asks of me. I never go seeking a sermon, he always gives it to me. So I use, my research for all of that. But when I read in my abnormal psychology book about sodomization, when a young child is sodomized and it splits the personality, it can, and that's how you can get borderline personality disorder. I saw it within my oldest daughter and a little bit in my youngest daughter, that at times they would act younger than what their age is because they would somewhat regress into a younger child. And it became more apparent as they became, older. And it's not so much now that they're almost 20 and 19. But it was really imperative whenever they were 16, 15, and 14. So, I mean, my struggle with that was, how do I treat my daughters? Do I treat them as little children, or do I treat them I continue to them because in reality, they're adults. So at times I would push them maybe in the wrong instances, which would then trigger my daughter's PTSD. My oldest daughter, she's angry. My middle daughter would, suffocate herself in depression. So I'm trying to figure out, how to best handle and juggle two young little girls who are fighting within themselves to figure out what had happened to them, still be their mom and support system at the same time. And that was really hard. Now, and that, there's lots of studies on what sodomy does to a child. I do have a sermon on pedophilia on the ministry website now, because, like I said, my daughters were molested and sodomized, and I believe in proof. So the guy who did it, his reports on the line too, and then so is that information about what happens to the brain when children are sodomized. So that study is published with that sermon.
Thank you for sharing that, Reverend Liz. Honestly, I have to just voice this out. I'm not very comfortable hearing it because, I mean, I'm a teacher, you're a mom, we care for children. Like,
We
there's
do.
this extra layer of you wanting to care for them and just enjoying their innocence and
Yes.
letting them get the best benefit of being a child. And a lot of my classes in psychology, especially when you're a teacher, it's prerequisite of you to take a lot of psychology classes, and the way you perceive the world as a child, how well you will trust the world when you grow up, will stem
Yeah.
from how trusting you can be in terms of your environment when you are in your when you're young and onwards. Especially those are your formative years. So I want to ask you, how are your children today? How are their trust issues, especially with adults?
That's a really great question, Reverend Reg. Because before the trauma, my daughters, were happy-go-lucky girls, and like you said, I wanted to enjoy their innocence, but their innocence was stripped from them. So their security within me, their mom was stripped because the woman whose father molested them ended up beating them as well for them telling me he molested them. So they sometimes, when we'd get in arguments as mothers and daughters do, would get triggered at PTSD. So then it became they're no longer looking at their mom, they're looking at their abuser. So then I'm looking at my scared daughter who's scared of me. And I'm just like, what am I supposed to do with this? So my oldest daughter, she will be 20 in October, and she is actually enrolled in college, and she took psychology classes, and she told me that that was the best thing for her to do was to learn what details her therapists were trying to teach her, but maybe, didn't convey in the message that, resonated with her. So I was really proud she took that initiative to learn about her because she said, Mom, my coping skills actually work. And I'm like, her name's Angela. And I'm like, Angela, thank God you finally understand that because, we've been trying to tell you this, but a person has to be ready to move forward before they can even start to utilize what people are trying to teach them. Because if you're not ready in your mind, people can talk to you all day, all night, and you're not going to understand or be ready to move until you're completely done and fed up. Now, my middle daughter, Cassandra, she will be 19 in December, and she just graduated high school too. Both my daughters graduated high school, no pregnancies, and I mark that as a big thing because I've always told them, I said, don't be like me. I love you guys, but I want you to have a life. Because when I put in the concept and God showed me what generational curses meant, me all summer of 2017 on how to break those generational curses because I did not want my daughters to be teenage mothers. I did not want my daughters to, grow up and be attached to violent people.
Exactly,
With that being said,
exactly.
back to my middle daughter, she's doing really good too. She did, make amends with her father and go back and live with him, which is fine because she's an adult and she has, things she needs to work out. But they're both, thriving now. But it took work and it took me, losing jobs or quitting jobs in order to make sure my daughters got where they needed to be.
Yes, thank you so much, Reverend Liz. I'm so proud of you. That's another thing, my God. Uh, this is
Thank
one of the most fulfilling interviews that I have done. And, you know, one of the things that I'm very happy to do for people is to give them that space where they can just get the thing that's bothering off their chest the most. Because we both know, as people who have backgrounds in psychology, that if the thing that bothers you the most is not released from your energy, it's just going to be a very challenging thing, and it will block you from your abundant good. And I know, Reverend Liz, you talk about the God within, and we both know that God within is the source of all our good, our peace, health, plenty, happiness, and greater success. So please explain to us, Reverend Liz, how when a person is not healed from their shock and trauma, it can also block them from receiving their abundant good. Especially
Okay.
you, for example, I wanna highlight what you did, because being able to be in the space where you can be very generous with your time, your resources, and your uplifting energy at the time when most people are going through shock and trauma, and just mental anxiety and confusion because of what happened during the pandemic.
Right.
That's a lot for a person to do given what happened to you in the past. So I'm very inspired by you, and I'm sure that a lot of our listeners are also inspired. And by the way, before you answer that, Dr. Rugusman is watching all the way from the Philippines too.
Oh my,
So please go ahead and answer.
thank you. Thank you. I'm honored again to even be able to do this with you, and God is so good. But God is so good. So, like I said, before the pandemic, I moved to St. Louis to build his ministry, and that's all I was focused on. So, before the pandemic, I thought he put me in my dream job because I didn't know what his vision was for the ministry. He just said, move to St. Louis, build my ministry. And I'm like, okay, I have a website, so I'll do that. And so I continue to write sermons while I work behavioral health at a hospital. So then the pandemic hit, and when God showed me what righteousness means, which is morals, values, and ethics acceptable to God, and that's the Hebrew original definition of the word righteousness, I began to examine my life. How was I living? What was my morals? What are my ethics? What does that even mean again? I mean, I learned all that in school, but it was time to really apply that to myself. So God always, before I teach anything, has me work on something within myself first so that I can put my testimony to it. Because if you grow to talk to me, you're going to find that I have a testimony for almost every scenario in life. And I've been through a lot, but I will never not speak about it because that's what God has called us to do. When God dwells within you and you know what righteousness means and you start walking your morals, values, and ethics, then people are going to notice. So working at Mo, which was the hospital, during COVID, we were getting emails stating that the behavioral health techs and nursing staff and everything else was being exposed to COVID. But the kitchen staff, was being told that they were not. And they were bringing, COVID positive positive patients onto our lockdown units, and we had children and we had elderly. So I felt that was a violation ethically and morally. How could you contaminate and possibly kill someone who's already going through mental and emotional and physical stress and trauma? And then let's add, the pandemic to it, and they weren't following CDC guidelines. So I had to leave, which allowed me to build his ministry. So he told me to start writing messages like I would on the writable wall that we had on our children. I do Did You Know segments with either psychology or archaeology facts that align to God's word. I drive delivery services. People talk to me. I built the podcast by myself. He showed me how to do that with a free streaming service called Anchor. He helped me build an app through Google. And now he told me it was time to compile everything that he taught me, everything that he worked with in me, and it. When I hit print, Reverend Reggie, the moment I hit print, that last little bit of animosity, that last little bit of my past, that last little bit of everything, it went away. But let me tell you, let me back that up for you 1 second, because God said this is important. All of June, before I published this book last week, was like a mini reel of my entire life flashing before my eyes. And I've come to learn the signs of God. My signs are either something in my life explodes to the point that, a phoenix emerges because it's beautiful and transformative, or time stands still and it's either destructive or another, path down a road of interesting, walk with God. So once I learned again how to perceive God's word, I was then able to learn how to change my perspective of God's word. When God taught me that when we're in constant doubt, half our brain shuts down. So we can't even make rational decisions in the first place. And his word actually tells us that. He tells us to be still for a reason. He tells us to wait. He tells us to be patient, all for a reason. Because one of those reasons is we're doing damage, physical, mental, and emotional damage to ourselves when we're in a constant state of distress. And whenever we're in a state of abundance and joy because God lives within us, whether you find your abundance and joy with the sun just rising and setting every day, that is still something to be abundant and grateful for because God worked and woke you up. So it's always trying to find, for me at least, how can I help someone else? During my entire life, everyone's come to me to ask me questions. And I now understand that as well because I'm always the one who's going to ask why, or what are we doing, or, when is this, or I ask questions. But I do, always get answers. Do I always like the answers? No. But then God teaches me how to work through them.
Exactly. Thank you for sharing that, Reverend Liz. It's such a powerful thing to hear, especially when you talked about God earlier, especially you were saying that one of the things that I'm picking up from the whole thing that you're saying is that the presence of mind that you have is incredible. And the dialogue that you have with God is just so powerful, especially when you need guidance most, when you need provision most. Please tell us about the power of connecting to source that way, because honestly, for me, for example, I didn't really know that I can talk to God until I studied metaphysics. That I can just talk out loud, and it's such a powerful transformative experience. It will literally help me change my limited state of life to an expanded state where I can allow more of God's goodness to be felt by myself. So please
Mm-hmm.
share with us your technique, how you actually talk to God, how you connect to that presence, because you're a woman of great presence of mind. And I really believe that it's actually just another way of saying being in the great presence of God within you. Please tell
Thank
us
you.
more about it. Welcome.
Well, rephrase your question, if you wouldn't mind.
I mean, it's just powerful for someone to be in the middle of a very difficult situation personally and being able to maintain your presence of mind for yourself. And then you're going to add other people. You're going to hold space for other
Okay.
people. So, how do you do
Um,
it?
I studied I studied metaphysics somewhat as well. I did take a spiritual quest seminar through the ministry where I learned meditation techniques. I learned about Reiki healing. I learned about how to ground myself. But talking to God, I always did. And I don't know if, he was like my imaginary friend because my mom, always told me I had an imaginary friend. I remember my imaginary friend, and I'd sit at the top of the stairs and talk to him. But I know God has always been with me because of the reaction people have and because of the things that I've been through. And so once he was able to change my perspective on the events that took place in my life and started to change my heart and mind to see how he could utilize my testimony, then I really started to see why I had to go through this and why my daughters did as well. So, for example, something that helped me was, working behavioral health because I could work one on one, with the kids. So that put me in a constant frame of mind because not only was I teaching them, I was also helping myself to remember my own coping skills and my own training. So whenever things did get chaotic, I was able to, better handle that. Did I handle it always accurately every time? Oh my goodness, no. Nobody ever does and ever will, because situations are always different. But that doesn't mean you can't try, and you should always try. I honestly, I meditate. I believe in hertz. God showed me that our bodies are made up of water. So Dr. Emoto has an experiment where he took a microscope and filmed water molecules, telling the water, I love you in positive words, or telling the water hateful and negative words. And he photographed this, and this is a sermon in the book that just got published. And I have pictures in there for you to see. The positive loved ones look like beautiful snowflakes, and the words where you're telling, the water, I hate you, and being negative and playing negative music looks like acid rain. So whenever I was shown this, I'm like, okay, well, no wonder because our brains are 75% water, our hearts are 75% water. And don't quote me on that statistic, but it is accurate in the book. And then the rest of our organs. So if we're talking negative to each other constantly and degrading each other, then we're transforming our actual water molecules within ourselves to reflect negative energy. So everything resonates. I believe in moon phases. I believe I'm an Aquarius. So I did my numerology charts. I've dug into like what makes me in order to better understand what God has for me. Because again, I believe God is everything. He showed me how to put thermal dynamics to what our soul really means. Because if you understand the law of thermodynamics, meaning that atoms, matter, and mass cannot be created or destroyed, then you understand that God is everywhere. Our soul cannot be created or destroyed. God says all souls belong to him. So the soul of the righteous and the unrighteous. I'm, not going to say I know 100% what happens, but the law of thermodynamics is pretty clear. And so I want to tell the world that if you can believe in a law that can be proved, why can't you believe in God when he's an all-consuming fire? Because fire is energy and he can't be created or destroyed. God says he's light. Light is energy. Light cannot be created or destroyed. So those are the things that he has taught me. And he was teaching my bitterness, my hostility towards what happened to my daughters and myself, slowly but surely hit the point where God freed me. My chains are broken and I am 100% free from my past.
Thank you so much for that, Reverend Liz. And that's just such a powerful thing to hear. You talked about freedom and it's full moon. And one of the things that I learned from my weekend teacher is that this is the perfect time for you to be freed from any form of bondage. And while you are intentionally releasing any form of bondage that you are consciously aware of and unconsciously aware of, you can also declare that those people whom you asked for forgiveness and release from, and they're not ready to give it to you, declare that you are now free and blessed from that experience and allow God, higher consciousness source, to do the rest of the work. Thank you so much, Reverend Liz Jackson. I had such an amazing time with you. And thank you for openly sharing your personal life with us. I know it takes a lot of courage to do that. And I'm just amazed that every now and then, when it gets personal this way, someone will always send me a message right the same day or days after how much that particular story changed their situation as well. At least they felt more empowered and courageous. So thank you, Reverend Liz, for doing that. And Reverend Liz, I always ask my guests if there is one perspective that they would like to share to me and the rest of our audience that you want us to immediately take action on, what would that be?
Okay, the perspective that I want to share is the title of the book. The Lion's Tears Ministries, Attitudes of God. When our hearts and minds are negative, our actions and behaviors are going to be negative. We cannot serve God with hostility, anger, animosity, clinical, our anger, malice, bitterness within us. We cannot, because those chain us down back to our PTSD, our depression, our stress, our past. And God says, lay that aside. We create our own slavery whenever we do not free ourselves from our past, from the weights of the world, when we fail to perceive our higher purpose. We are hindering ourselves. And so that's the message. And not only ourselves, but we're hindering each other when we are acting and speaking out of hate. And it's a choice, brothers and sisters. We can choose to be happy and we can choose love and we can choose prosperity together, or we can choose to tear each other down. But I want the world to know that the God of the universe is a God of love and not one of hate and torture, as the world wants you to believe, because God himself says he loves us. And if you examine your life, you're going to see where God put his hand on you when you wasn't even looking, and how many times he protected you from completely failing. And that's the message. And Reverend Reggie, I thank you so very much for being able to come on your program and sharing God's word with you and your audience and the world. And I'm very humble and blessed, and I give God all the glory. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Reverend Liz. It's such a powerful thing to have you on the show because I remember when I was a weekend practitioner and I was devoted to it. It's one of the spiritual experiences that I've had in my evolution. And one of the things that we do during full moon is to banish uh, ourselves from any form of limitation. And it's such a powerful thing to be able to say, you know what, this is the thing that bothered me the most, and I am declaring freedom from it. And that's exactly what you did today. And I'm very sure that everything happens for a reason. Somebody out there is listening to this and is totally healed by your position of power, strength, and graciousness that you're welcoming source energy, God, higher consciousness, whatever name you want to call it, to be on top of the situation, no matter how painful it is. Thank you
That's
so much, Reverend Liz. And, here in perspective, we always encourage everyone to pick up a perspective that you resonate with the author or the thought leader. And Reverend Liz, in case someone wants to get in touch with you, how can they find you? Where shall they go?
They can contact me on Facebook at Liz Angel of Ephesus. I'm also on Instagram. You can go on to the ministry, that is theliontears.com. You can send me an email. The site is free to join the ministry. I don't, charge a fee to become a member. I don't have ads on the ministry either, but you can always shoot me an email, text, through Facebook. I am a private person, so I don't give my personal email out, but I am, again, always available through the ministry email or Facebook.
All right. Thank you for that, Reverend Liz. And please check if I have it typed properly. Liz
Yes.
Angel of. All right. So let
Yep.
me just show this to our audience so that they can easily find you on Facebook, especially for people who, you know, Reverend Liz, honestly, over the years, I also noticed that a lot of people are. Is this right? Please double check.
Yes, that is perfect.
Awesome. So that's the thing that you type on Facebook so that you can easily find her. All right. So some of you are listening in YouTube, so that's what you type. All right.
YouTube has the Lions Tears Ministry, where I have some sermons on what we just talked about as well. I took and recorded my screen, so what you'll see is me talking from what is written on the ministry website.
Mhm. Thank you for that. So let me
You're
just
welcome.
check that and that we can give a heads up to the people who are listening
Okay.
on YouTube. So awesome. So, all right. Please check, Reverend Liz. Did I get that right?
Yep, that's perfect.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Reverend Liz. It's a rainy Saturday morning here in Manila, and I look forward to having the interview about your book for the other show.
I do too. I can't wait to work with you some more, Reverend Reg. It's been a wonderful blessing. And again, thank you so very much for having me. You have
Awesome.
a blessed day. May God strengthen you guys. And I know He's protecting you during that tsunami, but just keep on working. And thank you, Reverend, again, very much.
You're welcome. And I also want to shine the spotlight on Dr. Joy Maestas, who's my dear friend and colleague, also a common friend of ours. She's such an
Yeah.
amazing colleague, and she treats you like family. I love her. She's just so joyful to to be around
She
with.
really is sweet. And when I asked her for help,
Yeah.
because like like we discussed, You are
Mhm.
giving me my first interview, and I am so thankful because I will never forget this. But
Mhm.
Miss Joy, Dr. Joy, was quick to hook me up with you and network with me because she knew how it was building her ministry and everything too. And honestly, brothers and sisters, it is literally me and God doing everything. I don't have a crew. I have God. And when you have God, He is your crew. Because some of these sermons and like putting the website together or creating the app, when God works, usually only takes me a couple hours. And I have
Mhm.
no actual training. I want you all to know that God just shows me, how to do these systems and it gets done. So don't think that because you lack training of any kind, God cannot use you. God uses everyone. God can use you if you don't know, how to run a computer or whatever. God will teach you what you need to do in order to set you up and to provide for you.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Reverend Liz. And
Absolutely.
another thing that I also want to share because uh, which is I think also important because one of the things that I have used in my conversations with God is that when you pray for all things that you need to just demonstrate if it's part of God's will, then even the people that you need to work with will actually show up. And
Yes.
honestly, just like I started as well with just having a mobile phone because I had my old laptop and
Hmm.
it wasn't ready to do streaming. And then I left it in my former place. So all those things, but like what you said, if you know what you're supposed to do and you have that constant communication with God or source, whatever name you want to call it,
Yep.
then all the other things will just get added onto you. But it does take a certain level of confidence to be able to put everything together. So
It
thank you
sure
so much
does.
for being such an inspiring guest. I trust
Absolutely.
that your ministry will grow. It's such a powerful thing.
Thank you.
So I look forward to having you again.
I
Let's keep
look
in
forward
touch.
to being here again.
All
Thank you.
right.
And God
Love
bless
you.
the Philippines. And I just, I'm thankful again. Thank you guys. Thank you, brothers and sisters. I love you. And I hope you all, again, just continue to stay positive and be blessed because God is working.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
All right. Mabuhay, Reverend Liz. It actually means live and go beyond existing. Have fun.
Shalom.
All right. So, mabuhay, everyone. I'm so happy to have Reverend Liz Jackson guest on the show and talk about something very personal because actually she's not required to talk about anything like that. But I'm just grateful that she's able to share it because, a lot of my clients as well over the years, they don't know what's blocking them, but a lot of their shock and trauma, they might have experienced something as traumatic as what she has mentioned earlier. It does block a lot of things in your professional life. So, if ever any of you has been through anything traumatic like that, I trust that you get professional help and get it out of your system. And remember, like what Reverend Liz mentioned earlier, if you connect to source, that God power and presence within you, and really have a heart to heart dialogue, then a lot of things can actually move forward for the better. And at the same time, I love that she talked about asking for God's help because not only will God supply you with the skills, but will also provide you the right people to work with. So it has been my experience, especially I like to combine metaphysics with the spiritual aspect of leverage because I read a lot of books and I'm inspired by a lot of thought leaders and visionaries. And every time we open the space for more people to be part of our projects, we're not only empowering ourselves, but we're also creating a wonderful place to interact and be in that co-creative project with Source together. So teamwork makes the dream work. I always believe that. And just pick up something that you feel resonates with you best and take action immediately so you can experience that particular experience that you truly want to dwell on. So, mabuhay everyone, live and go beyond existing, and see you again tomorrow. I'm gonna have Reverend Tina Brinkley Potts, who's an amazing metaphysician and digital marketer, come to the show. We'll talk about prosperity and all the other things that we feel we have psychological blocks. So have fun, everyone.